Every shot hit dead center. Not close to center, dead center. The old man never missed, never wasted ammunition, never showed off. He'd fire 5 rounds, examine his target through binoculars, and nod with satisfaction. The SEAL recruits at the next lane had been watching him for weeks, impressed by his consistency, but assuming he was just a skilled hobbyist. Until recruit Danny Torres saw how the old man assembled his rifle. The speed, the precision, the muscle memory. This wasn't a weekend warrior. This was someone who had done this professionally. And when Danny saw the faded tattoo peeking out from under the man's rolled-up sleeve, everything made sense. Welcome to Veteran Stories. Before we continue this powerful story of hidden mastery, deadly precision, and the moment when a simple tattoo revealed a legend in disguise, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe that true skill recognizes true skill, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those whose expertise speaks louder than words. The San Diego Tactical Training Center opened at 7 a.m. sharp, but William Bill Mason was always there by 6:45. He parked his weathered Ford pickup in the same spot, carried the same leather rifle case, and walked to lane 12 with the unhurried pace of someone who had nowhere else to be and all day to get there. At 67, Mason looked exactly like what the younger shooters expected, a retired man with time on his hands and enough disposable income to pursue expensive hobbies. His jeans were faded but clean, his flannel shirts rotated through 3 colors, and his baseball cap was the generic kind sold at sporting goods stores with no logos or patches to indicate allegiance to anything. The Tactical Training Center catered to serious shooters, law enforcement, military personnel, competitive marksmen, and civilians who took firearms training beyond recreational plinking. It wasn't the kind of place that attracted casual hobbyists, which made Mason something of an anomaly among the clientele. Mason's routine never varied. Sign in at the front desk with W. Mason in careful handwriting. Pay for lane 12 specifically, never accepting alternative lanes when it was occupied. Set up his shooting station with military precision. Rifle case positioned exactly perpendicular to the firing line. Shooting mat aligned perfectly parallel. Ammunition arranged in neat rows of 5 cartridges each. His rifle was a custom .308 that most experienced shooters would recognize as expensive and precisely configured. But Mason handled it like a familiar tool rather than a prized possession, checking the action and scope with practiced efficiency before beginning his session. The Naval Training Facility at Coronado was 15 minutes away, and SEAL recruits regularly used the Tactical Center for marksmanship training that exceeded what could be accomplished on military ranges. These young men represented the elite of military candidates, physically exceptional, mentally tough, and driven to achieve standards that most people considered impossible. 3 recruits had been training at the center for 6 weeks. Danny Torres from Chicago, a former Marine who'd earned his way into SEAL training through exceptional performance in Iraq. Alex Chin from Seattle, whose analytical mind and technical precision had impressed instructors throughout his military career. And Marcus Webb from Texas, whose natural marksmanship ability had earned him sniper training in the Army before he'd applied for SEAL selection. They typically arrived around 9 a.m. after their morning PT and before afternoon tactical training. Their sessions were intense, focused on the kind of precision shooting that SEAL operations required: long-range accuracy, rapid target acquisition, shooting under stress conditions. The recruits had noticed Mason during their first week at the range. Impossible not to notice someone whose shooting was so consistent it seemed mechanical. But they'd categorized him as a skilled civilian hobbyist, the kind of retiree who'd found purpose in perfecting marksmanship skills he'd never need to use professionally. That assessment began to change as they observed Mason more carefully over several weeks. Danny Torres had been a designated marksman during his Marine deployment and understood the difference between good shooting and professional shooting. Mason's performance fell into the latter category, but Danny couldn't identify what specifically marked it as such. "Watch how he breathes," Danny told Alex and Marcus during one of their range sessions. "He's not controlling his breathing the way civilians do. He's managing his respiratory cycle like someone who learned precision shooting under pressure." Alex studied Mason's technique from their position 3 lanes over. Look at his stance. That's not recreational shooting posture. That's tactical positioning, like he's been trained to shoot while maintaining situational awareness. Marcus, whose own marksmanship skills were exceptional, noticed something else. Count his shots. 5 rounds, pause for assessment, 5 more rounds. That's not hobbyist pacing. That's ammunition conservation, like someone who learned to shoot when every round had to count. The recruits began paying more attention to details they'd initially overlooked. Mason's scanning of the range when he arrived, quick but thorough assessment of positions, personnel, and equipment. His positioning at lane 12, which provided clear sight lines to all range entrances and exits. His habit of keeping his shooting kit organized for rapid deployment or quick departure. That's not civilian behavior, Alex concluded. That's operational awareness. The morning that changed everything began like any other. Mason arrived at 6:45, signed in with his usual careful handwriting, and set up at lane 12. The SEAL recruits arrived at 9 a.m. and began their training routine at lane 6, 7, and 8. Mason had finished his first string of fire and was cleaning his rifle when Danny noticed something unusual. Mason disassembled the weapon with movements that were too fast, too automatic to be recreational. His hands moved without conscious direction, following muscle memory that suggested thousands of repetitions under various conditions. "Guys," Danny said quietly, not taking his eyes off Mason. "Watch him reassemble that rifle." Alex and Marcus focused on Mason's hands as he began putting the rifle back together. The process took less than 90 seconds and was executed with the kind of smooth efficiency that comes from performing the same task under stress, in darkness, under time pressure. "Holy shit," Marcus whispered. "That's not hobbyist rifle handling. That's professional weapon maintenance." Alex timed the process. 87 seconds from complete disassembly to ready-to-fire condition. That's faster than some of our instructors. Danny was studying Mason's movements more intently now. Look at how he's checking the action. That's not cleaning. That's inspection for combat readiness. Every movement has a purpose related to reliability under adverse conditions. Mason finished his rifle maintenance and began preparing for his next string of fire. The recruits watched him settle into his shooting position with new understanding of what they were observing. "We're not watching a civilian hobbyist," Danny said with certainty. "We're watching a professional." Mason had been shooting for another 30 minutes when the California heat prompted him to roll up his sleeves. It was a casual gesture, done without thought while he paused to hydrate between shooting strings. That's when Danny saw it. On Mason's left forearm, partially obscured by decades of sun exposure and age, was a tattoo that made Danny's breath catch. Not because it was elaborate or obvious, but because it was simple and unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. A trident. Not ornate, not decorative, but the specific design that indicated U.S. Navy SEAL qualification. Below it, faded but still visible, were small symbols that Danny recognized as deployment markers and unit designations. "Alex." "Marcus," Danny said, his voice tight with recognition. "Look at his forearm." Both recruits followed Danny's gaze and saw what had captured his attention. Alex, who'd studied military insignia during his intelligence training, recognized the tattoo immediately. "That's a SEAL trident," Alex said quietly. "Vietnam era, based on the style and fading." Marcus studied the additional markings below the trident. "Those are deployment indicators. Multiple tours, based on the number of symbols." Danny was doing quick mental math. Mason appeared to be in his late 60s, which would put his military service during the height of the Vietnam conflict. The tattoo style and condition suggested it had been applied in the early 1970s. "We're not just looking at a former SEAL," Danny realized. "We're looking at someone who was part of the teams when they were developing the tactics and techniques we still use today." The 3 recruits exchanged glances, each understanding the significance of their discovery. They were sharing a shooting range with a Vietnam-era SEAL, someone whose experience predated their own training by decades, and whose operations had likely remained classified for national security reasons. After some discussion, they decided Danny should approach Mason. As the former Marine with combat experience, he had the credibility to initiate a conversation between warriors. Mason was packing his equipment when Danny approached lane 12. "Excuse me, sir," Danny said respectfully. "I'm Danny Torres, Navy SEAL recruit." Mason looked up from his rifle case, studying Danny's face with a careful assessment of someone who'd learned to evaluate people quickly and accurately. "Good morning," Mason said simply. "Sir, I couldn't help but notice your tattoo. I served with Marines in Iraq before SEAL training, and I recognized the trident." Mason's expression didn't change, but Danny saw something shift in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the kind of careful evaluation that preceded decisions about how much information to share. "That was a long time ago," Mason said. "Sir, would you mind if I asked when you served?" Mason finished securing his rifle case before answering. 1971 to 1995. Different teams, different assignments. Danny felt his respect increase immediately. Mason had served for 24 years, which indicated successful career progression through the SEAL community during some of its most challenging operational periods. "Sir, my teammates and I have been watching your shooting. Your technique is exceptional." Mason looked toward lane 6, 7, and 8 where Alex and Marcus were still conducting their training. "You boys are pretty good yourselves. Better than most I've seen come through BUD/S recently." Danny realized that Mason had been evaluating their performance just as they'd been observing his. "Sir," Danny said, "would you be willing to share some guidance about precision shooting? We're always trying to improve our marksmanship." Mason considered the request. He'd been watching the 3 recruits for weeks and had noted their dedication, their professionalism, and their respect for the training they were receiving. These weren't typical SEAL candidates. They showed the kind of maturity and seriousness that suggested they understood the responsibilities that came with special operations service. "What specifically are you working on?" Mason asked. "Long-range precision, mostly. Our instructors are excellent, but they've never explained some of the finer points of environmental reading and target analysis that we see in your shooting." Mason looked down the range at the targets the recruits had been using. Their groupings were good by conventional standards, but he could see areas for improvement that suggested coaching gaps in their training. "Set up your rifles," Mason said. "Let me see what you're doing, and maybe I can suggest some adjustments." Over the next hour, Mason worked with each recruit individually, offering corrections and refinements that immediately improved their accuracy. His teaching style was precise, economical with words, and focused on practical application rather than theoretical knowledge. "Torres," Mason said, watching Danny's shooting position, "you're fighting your natural respiratory cycle. Work with your breathing pattern. Don't try to control it artificially. Chun, your grip tension is inconsistent between shots. Focus on repeatable pressure that doesn't change with target distance. Webb, your trigger control is excellent, but you're second-guessing your sight picture. Trust your initial alignment and follow through smoothly." The improvements in their shooting were immediate and significant. As the training session progressed, Mason began sharing insights that went beyond basic marksmanship instruction. He talked about reading environmental conditions that most shooters never considered, about maintaining concentration under stress, and about the mental discipline required for consistent precision. "Sir," Alex asked during a break in shooting, "where did you learn to teach marksmanship like this?" Mason looked out at the targets where the recruits' groupings had tightened significantly under his guidance. Different places, different circumstances where precision mattered more than speed, and where missing had consequences you didn't want to live with. "What kind of circumstances?" Marcus asked. Mason was quiet for a moment, looking at the 3 young men who represented the current generation of SEAL candidates. They deserved honest answers about what they were preparing for, but some experiences couldn't be shared in detail. "The kind where you only get one shot to get it right," Mason said, "where the people you're responsible for depend on your accuracy, and where failure means someone doesn't come home." Danny understood that Mason was referring to operational experience that couldn't be discussed in specifics. "Sir, how many deployments did you complete?" "Enough to learn that good shooting is just the beginning. The hardest part isn't hitting targets, it's making the right decisions about when to shoot and when not to shoot. Alex caught the implication. You're talking about rules of engagement in complex operational environments. Mason nodded. ROE that couldn't be written in manuals because every situation was different, where split-second decisions had strategic implications that went far beyond the immediate tactical situation. Mason continued working with the recruits, but his instruction evolved beyond technical marksmanship to encompass the mental and philosophical aspects of precision shooting in military operations. The weapon is just a tool, Mason told them. The real precision comes from understanding your responsibility to the people who depend on your competence. When you're operating in situations where civilian lives are at stake, where intelligence operations depend on surgical accuracy, where mission success requires eliminating specific threats without collateral damage, that's when marksmanship becomes something more than shooting. The recruits listened with the intensity of students who recognized they were receiving instruction that couldn't be found in training manuals. Sir, Danny asked, how do you maintain that level of precision under operational stress? Mason considered the question carefully. By understanding that stress is just another environmental factor to account for, like wind speed, temperature, or target movement. You train until precision becomes automatic. Then you trust your training when conditions become challenging. What about situations where the stakes are highest? Marcus asked. When the pressure is maximum, that's when you fall back on fundamentals, Mason replied. Breathing, sight alignment, trigger control, follow through. The basics don't change just because the consequences get higher. Mason's teaching was transforming not just their shooting technique, but their understanding of what precision marksmanship meant in the context of special operations. Word of Mason's informal instruction spread through the SEAL training community at Coronado, not as publicity, but as professional recognition that someone with exceptional knowledge was sharing experience with current candidates. Other SEAL recruits began requesting permission to train at the Tactical Center during Mason's regular sessions. Mason accepted these students selectively, working only with candidates who demonstrated serious commitment to learning and the maturity to handle advanced instruction responsibly. Mason's sessions became legendary among SEAL training staff. Recruits who worked with Mason consistently showed improved performance in marksmanship evaluations, but more importantly, they demonstrated better understanding of the psychological and ethical dimensions of precision shooting. What's different about the candidates who've trained with Mason? Asked Senior Chief Martinez, one of the BUD/S instructors. They understand that marksmanship is about responsibility, not just accuracy, replied Petty Officer Williams. They shoot with a kind of precision that comes from understanding consequences rather than just following techniques. Mason's influence on SEAL marksmanship training became significant enough that formal instructors began incorporating his teaching methods into official curriculum. 6 months after their first meeting, Mason shared more of his background with Danny, Alex, and Marcus, who had completed their SEAL training and were preparing for team assignments. Sir, Danny asked during one of their sessions, would you mind sharing more about your SEAL career? We've learned so much from your instruction, and we're curious about the operations that shaped your approach to precision shooting. Mason looked at the 3 newly qualified SEALs, understanding that they now had the security clearances and operational context to receive more detailed information about his service. SEAL Team 1 mostly, Mason said. Vietnam operations from 1971 to 1975, then different assignments through the 1980s and early 1990s. Operations that required precision shooting under conditions that tested everything we thought we knew about marksmanship. What kinds of operations? Alex asked. Mason was quiet for a moment, remembering missions that had remained classified for decades. Reconnaissance missions where accurate intelligence depended on eliminating specific targets without alerting larger enemy forces. Hostage rescue operations where civilian lives depended on surgical precision under extreme time pressure. Counterterrorism missions where collateral damage could create international incidents. Marcus understood the implications. Operations where missing meant mission failure and potentially strategic consequences. That's right. where the difference between hitting and missing was measured in lives saved or lost, missions accomplished or failed, and sometimes in international relations that affected global security. Mason's operational background explained the depth of his marksmanship knowledge and his emphasis on the responsibility that came with precision shooting capabilities. Mason's informal SEAL marksmanship program continued for 3 years, producing a generation of operators whose precision shooting capabilities exceeded traditional training outcomes. His students went on to successful careers in various SEAL teams, carrying his teaching methods to operational units around the world. The effectiveness of Mason's instruction led to formal recognition within the Naval Special Warfare community. The Naval Special Warfare Command invited Mason to consult on marksmanship training curriculum and to provide instruction at advanced courses for experienced operators. Mason accepted these roles reluctantly, preferring the informal atmosphere of the tactical center to institutional training environments. But he understood that his knowledge could benefit more SEALs if integrated into official training programs. "Why do you prefer teaching at the civilian range rather than at military facilities?" asked Captain Rodriguez, the officer coordinating Mason's consulting work. Mason looked out at the tactical center where he'd been teaching for 4 years. "Because learning happens differently when it's voluntary rather than mandatory. The SEALs who come here are seeking knowledge, not just completing requirements. That makes them better students and ultimately better operators." Captain Rodriguez understood that Mason's effectiveness came partly from the informal environment that allowed for the kind of mentoring relationship that couldn't be replicated in formal military training settings. 5 years after Mason began sharing his knowledge with SEAL candidates, the Naval Special Warfare Command established a new award recognizing individuals who made exceptional contributions to SEAL training and readiness. Mason was selected as the first recipient. The ceremony was held at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, attended by current and former SEALs who understood Mason's impact on the community's marksmanship capabilities. This award recognizes individuals whose knowledge and dedication have enhanced SEAL operational readiness, said the Naval Special Warfare Commander during the presentation. But more than that, it recognizes the principle that the most valuable instruction often comes from those who've proven their expertise under operational conditions. Mason accepted the award wearing a simple business suit rather than military uniform, maintaining the same humble approach that had characterized his civilian teaching. During his brief acceptance remarks, Mason focused on the SEALs he taught rather than his own contributions. This recognition belongs to the SEALs who continue serving in harm's way, using precision shooting skills to protect American interests around the world. My role was just sharing knowledge that previous generations of SEALs had developed through experience. The Real honor belongs to those who apply this knowledge in operational environments where lives depend on precision. 7 years after his first interaction with Danny, Alex, and Marcus, Mason continued his regular sessions at the San Diego Tactical Training Center. Now 74, he maintained the same shooting precision that had first attracted the attention of SEAL recruits, and his informal instruction program had become an integral part of the SEAL community's approach to advanced marksmanship training. His students now included not just SEAL candidates, but experienced operators seeking to refine their skills, military marksmanship instructors learning advanced teaching techniques, and select civilian law enforcement officers whose duties required precision shooting capabilities. Senior Chief asked a young SEAL who'd recently completed his first deployment, "How long do you plan to continue teaching?" Mason was cleaning his rifle after a morning session that had included students ranging from SEAL recruits to veteran operators. "As long as people can benefit from what I've learned," Mason replied. "Experience is only valuable if it's shared with people who can use it to serve others better." What's the most important thing you want SEALs to understand about precision marksmanship? Mason looked down the range where targets showed the results of morning training. Tight groupings that represented not just accuracy, but the kind of precision that could save lives in operational environments. "That precision shooting isn't about the shooter," Mason said. "It's about the people who depend on the shooter's competence." When you understand that responsibility, precision becomes something more than technique. It becomes a moral obligation. 10 years after Danny Torres first noticed Mason's faded seal trident tattoo, Mason remained a quiet presence at Lane 12 of the San Diego Tactical Training Center. His hair was whiter, his movements slightly slower, but his shooting remained precise, and his teaching continued to influence SEAL marksmanship capabilities. Danny, now a senior petty officer with multiple deployments, occasionally returned to train with Mason when he was in San Diego. The relationship had evolved from student-teacher to professional peers who shared understanding of what precision shooting meant in operational contexts. Senior Chief, Danny said during one of these sessions, "I wanted to thank you for what you taught us about marksmanship. It's made a difference in operations." Mason continued adjusting his scope while responding. "You made a difference in operations. I just shared some techniques that helped you apply your existing skills more effectively." It was more than techniques. You taught us about the responsibility that comes with precision shooting capabilities. Mason looked at Danny, seeing the confidence and competence that came from successful operational experience. "How many SEALs have you shared that knowledge with?" "Everyone I can, just like you taught us." Mason smiled. "That's how it's supposed to work. Experience gets passed from one generation to the next, with each generation adding their own lessons learned." As they continued their training session, Mason reflected on the unexpected way his retirement years had evolved. He'd intended to spend his time quietly practicing marksmanship as a personal hobby. Instead, he'd found new purpose in preparing the next generation of SEALs for the precision shooting requirements of modern special operations. Mason's influence on SEAL marksmanship training extended beyond the individuals he'd taught directly. His methods had been incorporated into official training curricula. His teaching philosophy had influenced instructor development programs, and his emphasis on precision as moral responsibility had become part of SEAL culture. But Mason's most significant contribution was intangible. The example he'd set of how experience and knowledge could be shared without seeking recognition or official position. His willingness to teach informally, to invest time in individual development, and to emphasize responsibility over technique had created a model for how retired SEALs could continue contributing to the community's readiness and effectiveness. "What Mason showed us," said one of his former students who'd become a SEAL instructor, "is that service doesn't end with retirement. The knowledge and experience we develop during our careers has value beyond our own performance. It can enhance the capabilities of future generations if we're willing to share it." Mason's story had become part of SEAL tradition, passed along through informal networks, as an example of how dedication to excellence could take many forms and how the most valuable instruction often came from unexpected sources. William Mason never intended to become a legendary figure in SEAL marksmanship training. He'd come to the San Diego Tactical Training Center seeking peaceful practice of skills he'd developed during 24 years of special operations service. But when Danny Torres noticed his faded SEAL trident tattoo, it began a relationship that transformed both Mason's retirement and SEAL marksmanship training. Mason's willingness to share knowledge developed through operational experience created a generation of SEALs whose precision shooting capabilities exceeded traditional training outcomes. Mason's story reminds us that expertise doesn't lose value when formal service ends. It can be shared in ways that enhance others' capabilities and contribute to missions that continue long after individual careers conclude. His example demonstrates how dedication to excellence can take many forms and how the most significant contributions often occur through quiet, sustained effort rather than dramatic gestures. The faded tattoo that first revealed Mason's background ultimately revealed something more important: that true warriors never stop serving. They just find new ways to apply their dedication to others' success. So now I ask you, have you ever encountered someone whose quiet competence suggested depths of experience and knowledge that could transform your understanding? Someone whose willingness to share expertise made you better at what you do? Share their story in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Because at Veteran Stories, we believe that the greatest teachers are often those who've proven their expertise under the ultimate test of real-world application, and who continue sharing that knowledge long after their formal service ends. Subscribe if stories like this matter to you. Because every community has people like Senior Chief Mason, experts whose knowledge can change lives if we're wise enough to recognize them and humble enough to learn from them.